your wife walks out on you, you lose your job, you get a DUI. It's like this exogenous kind of punch to the face of like, wake the hell up, look at what you're doing.
So before we did this, I rewatched our first interaction with each other.
Did you?
I did. Have you seen it lately?
I have not. I haven't treated myself.
Well, maybe we can start with that story. So for people who don't know, my first job, I was started as basically a phone answer at a talent studio, a talent management agency in Beverly Hills, which you were a client at. And I signed their first YouTube client, this guy named Dax Flame, who is this sort of surreal Andy Kaufman-esque performer. And I had him interview you to launch your first YouTube channel. And you showed up, in my recollection, high out of your mind. Is that correct?
No, I was sober. I was sober at that time. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
You were already sober?
I not only was I sober, I was probably 2 or 3 months sober, but I had just had this crazy surgery snafu that I recently talked about on my podcast. It was sort of the impetus I had to be sober for this surgery I was having like 2 weeks prior. And
okay.
Obviously, and when we get into the book, it's so much led up to that moment. So it just wasn't like random, hey, I'm having surgery, I should probably clean up. It was certainly the right time, but I was recovering from a surgery gone wrong, having spent like 2 weeks in the hospital, hyperbaric chamber, like life-threatening. But I also simultaneously had this movie I was promoting, and I wanted to start a YouTube channel. So that's how I found myself 6 weeks later with the young and ambitious Ryan Holiday. And did I ruin his career, Dax? Because I heard through the grapevine that because I made that video with him and I didn't act the way he wanted me to, that he quit making videos for a while.
Well, it's so weird. Like, we have these memories of how stuff went. And then when you actually, there's a great book by David Carr called A Night of the Gun or something like that. It's sort of an addiction memoir. And he goes back and he like investigates his own memory of things. And he realizes that like every part of his memory of a series of events was like totally wrong. So this was, I'm looking at the date. This is April 2008. So would you have gotten sober already?
Yeah, because I got sober February 15th of 2008, and everyone wants to know what happened on Valentine's Day. And I hate to break it to you, but I was in no position to be anyone's Valentine at that time.
Well, here's how I remember the events going, which is I had signed this YouTube client and nobody understood what YouTube was then. Obviously in 2008, it had just been purchased for all this money, but no one was making serious entertainment on it. And so I had suggested in this staff meeting that we have like a celebrity client come on this guy's thing and launch their own YouTube channel. And you know how it goes. They went down the list of all the people they wouldn't dare bring this to. And then
sure.
you were down there at the top of the middle of the list, I guess.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. But like, I remember thinking that you were acting so weirdly. Like here, this is what I was going to tell you. So I was looking at the first comment. This is from a year ago on the video, which already still has 700,000 views, which is pretty crazy. And it says, this is one of the strangest videos on Dax's channel for no other reason than the fact that Dax is by far the least awkward person in the room.
That's so good. That's so good. I had no idea I have to be honest, and I'm with the same manager who was one of the people who was a partner in that company, 15 years later. And he's done this to me twice. And once was with Dax. And the second, honestly, was with Shane Dawson 10 years ago. Both of whom, Dax, I was walking into Dax's whole shtick only worked if the celebrity or the person working off of him was normal, right? Because he was like this painfully uncomfortable, sort of awkward. I think later it was sort of revealed that it was slightly like perhaps he was on the spectrum or something. So I don't want to put a negative connotation to it. It's just he had a specific way of interaction, which was funny if the other person was trying hard to keep it sort of
Yeah.
uh, sort of keep it up for the camera. But I just mirrored him because I didn't know what I was walking into. And I'm deeply obsessed with people pleasing and also don't want anyone to be funnier than me, especially at that time. And that's why the video just became like probably the most awkward 12 minutes on YouTube.
It was so strange. I mean, that's why his stuff was really good, is that it was super awkward. So it was this kind of, I would argue it's one of the earliest sort of performance arts to go. It's performance art that sort of goes viral on the internet, and that's why it was popular and weird. And no one knew whether he was on the spectrum, whether this was this horrible, like whether he shouldn't have had access to a camera and like his parents had no idea what he was doing, or if it was all like brilliant performance art. And it's, did you ever see that? This is at the Bob Saget roast, where Norm Macdonald went up and he just bombed on purpose. Like he did like the worst act you could possibly do.
The best, yes.
This is, I wonder if that's a little bit what this is that you escalated the awkwardness so much that it was one of the most uncomfortable, like, because watching it now, it made me uncomfortable. But I remember being in the room thinking like, what is happening? This is insane.
Well, not to mention the fact that like, yeah, you can't meet Andy Kaufman at Andy Kaufman. You have to be Judd Hirsch, right? You have to be like screaming at him at his reaction, or just be so upset that this person is not subscribing to the social contract. And I didn't do that. I Kaufmaned Kaufman in this scenario. And because I didn't know what to expect. Similarly, I remember when I went and worked with Shane Dawson for the first time, I was 26. I'd never been on YouTube. And again, he was represented by the Collective, my manager's company at that time. And he's basically playing a black female character in the worst stereotype tropes that would never be allowed today. And I'm sitting there looking at my manager going, "You okay at this? Like, this
Yeah, right.
is who's allowing this?" And I similarly am awkward in that video.
Back in the ancient world, philosophy wasn't abstract, it wasn't theoretical, it was designed to help you live the best life. In Stoicism 101, we have a 2-week course that will introduce you into philosophy, that will make you a better person. There's interviews with me, daily lessons that will challenge you to be better, give you new ways of thinking, tackling the problems of life, becoming your best self. As Marcus Aurelius says, you could be good today, but instead you choose tomorrow. Epictetus says, how much longer are you going to wait to demand the best for yourself? Check out our new course, Stoicism 101, at dailystoic.com/101. That's hilarious. No, it was such a weird experience for me. And then I ended up leaving shortly thereafter and went on a totally different path in life, as sort of you did too. And then we ended up coming back together many years later, which I want to talk about. But it was such a weird, like the whole experience is just seared in my memory as like a weird part of a life that I no longer have.
Yes, I think in that way we have a kinship, in that there's like parts of our lives that we've lived that we so completely turned our back on that it's almost as if it was another person.
Yes, totally. And then the weird part about stuff being documented now is that you can go back and look at it and you're like, wait, that you can't deny that it was you, because it was you and it's there on the internet.
You could have so easily been an operator in the business and a guy who wears like a really nice suit and goes to annoying parties and has like kids that he sees sometimes and eats at Spago a lot, and was like a captain of industry within show business. And instead, like, I can't imagine you as anything other than like the stoic who lives in Bastrop, who opens a bookstore during a pandemic for fun.
Yeah, it's weird to think, like, you look at all the different paths you could have gone in life, and I could be driving a Range Rover right now, living in Los Angeles. I I could have been very successful, but would have been ultimately very unhappy. And I remember I was talking to you about this exact thing. And I was talking to you about how some people I knew then went on and they started this company that was then worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And you were just like, yeah, but you couldn't have done that. Like, you're not like that I couldn't have done it, but that it would have been impossible for me to be that person. And that was actually like weirdly relieving for me to hear, because it's not that I have regrets about it, but you sort of go like, should I have gone that way? What would have happened if I had gone that way? And then you realize that actually you can't go any other way than the way that you ended up going.
It's incredible to me when I see people who really get a kick out of like, I mean, there's like the normal jobs, like someone who's really into spreadsheets and loves kicking ass as a CPA. And I'm like, I look up to that. But then there are those types that you're referencing, those guys who drive the Range Rovers and are real operators in the business. And it's like the art of the deal. They'll say things like, sell it, don't smell it, without any irony, because their wins are different than ours.
Yeah, I remember just being like, I had a couple moments. I had one when I was there at the Collective, and then I had another one when I was at American Apparel. And I remember being at this conference that I'd gone to like a couple years in a row. And the first year I was there, I wasn't wearing a suit. And the next year I was there, I wasn't wearing a suit, but everyone else was. And I remember it occurring to me like the third time, like, if I keep coming to this, eventually I'll be one of the people in a suit, right?
Yes.
That you can't be in that thing for too long without becoming like essentially everyone else. And so you sort of entertain this idea that you're different, that you're not fully a part of the system or whatever, but you can't do that for very long.
I don't want to sound like I'm being critical because I love The Rock and I love Mark Wahlberg, but I look at those guys who are crushing it so hard, and now there's Mark Wahlberg Chevrolet, and there's, The Rock energy drink and tequila. And I think like, did they conquer showbiz? And now it's like what is their bent? Is it just this idea of being successful, putting your mind to something and succeeding and seeing it all the way through and moving on to the next thing? Is it just an entrepreneurial spirit? I don't know, because I'm not sure I possess that.
Yeah, or it's just like those operators in the business. There's a lot of ways to be successful in life where you don't actually do anything or like contribute in any positive way. And if you're smart and hardworking and not socially inept, you can find your way into one of those positions pretty easily. But it's not the most fulfilling sort of purpose-driven life out there.
Right. Yeah, I think I've certainly seen even the actors I look up to. I think that's why they become directors, like or something else in the business, because I do think even with acting, you can always push it, but there are certain people where I'm like, oh, they figured it out. Like they know how to be good regularly. And
Yeah.
I think they get a little bored.
Interesting. Well, so I was assuming, because memory can be so deceiving. So I would have assumed that you were still an addict then, and I was curious how your life changed. But that's really interesting, because obviously in the book I read about you getting sober. I would have thought that the dates overlapped differently. So I was also thinking like, how did they let him get on camera like this? Like how didn't someone intervene in the room, because this is obviously a person who needed help. But now I'm fascinated and thrown off by the fact that it happened differently than I remember.
I mean, everything you could be like, the only thing that I know without a shadow of a doubt was I was sober 2 months before
Right.
that. But
Because the date is seared in your memory.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I first got sober, and I would go to these men's stag meetings, which were these all men 12-step meetings, and these guys who were like pretty gruff would say to me, "Well, when'd you get sober? What's your day?" And you'd be like, you'd feel pressure to know right off the top of your head, and they'd say, "Good, like protect that date with your life." And so, but to your point, and what I talk about in the book is like, that kid, the only thing I was doing right in that moment was staying sober. And I certainly could have still been all of the other, I was still thoroughly out of my mind, I'm sure.
Walk me through that rock bottom moment, because you do talk about it in the book. But it's kind of a cliche trajectory of like child actor gets hooked on drugs, gets sober, turns their life around. But how does that go for you? Because I would have thought at that moment, watching you being, even though we're roughly the same age, you are someone who'd done all this stuff. So I would have thought like, this guy's like on the top. This guy's on top of the world. This guy has all the stuff. This guy's crushing. He must be so happy. But you were the exact opposite.
I think that basically, to just like give quick touchstones, I grow up incredibly overweight, 100 pounds overweight. So then I lose 100 pounds, but I'm the same head in a new body. And so I discover this new medicine that is way more efficacious in food and less calories. And I basically trade a Prius for a Ferrari. And I spend the next 4 years totally in chase of being a cliche, setting my life on fire, ruining relationships in show business, just becoming known as unreliable and just tough to work with. I'm either running from the police on a regular basis, mostly because I called them myself, because I assumed there was some sort of incentive for being the first to alert them. There isn't, in case you're wondering. And basically breaking my mom's heart on a regular basis. So that's where I find myself at 21, about 2 months before I get sober. And sort of the big thing that I've always wanted my whole life was I hated being different from as far back as I can remember, being the son of being an only child of a single parent, or being overweight or what have you. I just wanted to be normal. And then when I fell in love with acting, I didn't want to be the funny fat guy, and I didn't want to be the kid actor. I just wanted to be an actor. And so what I talk about in the book was there was this moment, somehow I had booked the biggest part of my life when I was in the depths of my drug addiction, a movie called The Whackness with my favorite actor, Sir Ben Kingsley. And the movie got into the Sundance Film Festival, and it was my dream to not only be at this festival, but I was finally a real actor, not a kid star, not the funny fat guy, a real actor. And we're at the screening the night, the movie premieres, and Quentin Tarantino is there. And suddenly I'm like literally amongst the people I so look up to. And I wake up the next morning and the reviews are coming in and the reaction's great. And I immediately tell everyone in the house I'm saying that I need to leave right now. I'm getting on a plane. I'm out of here. And people are screaming at me. They said, Josh, why? Like, this never happens. And it may never happen again. And you're going to leave. Enjoy this. And I just, as soon as I was a member of the club, it's that great saying, like, I never wanted to be part of a club that would have me as a member. And it was one of the most impactful moments of my life that I realized, good or bad, at the highest of the high or the lowest of the low, I am bottomless, and nothing, be it food, drugs, or prestige, can fill up this hole in my soul. And I got sober 2 weeks later, and I think it's undoubtedly correlated, that sort of spiritual bottom.
Do you think about, because I've written about this before, how many people have moments like that where they get to the top of whatever it is, they hit a bestseller list, or they sell their company, or they're cover of a magazine, they win a gold medal, Super Bowl, whatever it is. And then they realize that it was never going to do the thing for them that they wanted it to do. Because I think that's what drives so many of us, right? You wanted your dad to be proud of you. You wanted to not feel like a loser. You wanted to feel cool. You wanted to be comfortable in your own skin, whatever that driving thing is for each person that drives you to achieve greatness at some profession. Then it turns out to be anticlimactic. How many of us turn away from that moment? Like, instead of actually listening, we're like, oh, I just need to do it more.
Totally. No, I mean, we wake up, I find, I can only speak for people like me, right? So addicts, we respond great to catastrophe. So your wife walks out on you, you lose your job, you get a DUI. It's like this exogenous kind of punch to the face of like, wake the hell up, look at what you're doing. But it's short lived. And what you do in that moment is what is truly that crossroads moment. There's like a saying where if a guy calls you who's drunk and has been drunk for a long time and asks for help, don't let him take a nap, because he might rest up a bit and he might eat a sandwich and have a little bit of time go by and think, it wasn't that bad. So you're right. There are certainly people who have these moments every couple of years or what have you. And instead of taking action to maybe getting help, they double down on whatever got them there in the first place.
Yeah, and it's not even just it's help. It's just like understanding the truth of it, right? So like you sacrifice for years and years, to become let's say a Super Bowl winning coach, and you've neglected your family, you've neglected your health, you've done all this stuff to get there, and then it's anticlimactic. There's this moment where you go, oh, it wasn't worth it. It wasn't what I thought it would be. And then, you go to sleep that night, then you party a couple days, and you wake up a week later. That the breakthrough-ness of that epiphany, it has a short shelf life, and then it expires, and then you just go back to how you've always been. You don't make the change because you've lost that. It's expired. It's moved on. You lost the freshness of it, wore off, and then you just go back to who you always were.
Yeah, I've heard Paul Gilmartin, who has this great podcast, The Mental Illness Happy Hour, talks about a friend of his who summited Everest and was at, sort of base camp and explaining what it was like, slowly getting up as the sun was coming, to its highest peak and reaching the peak and looking down. And Paul says, and when you reach the top, was your father's love there? And it's so true. It's right. I mean, I think we're all, it would be so fun to ask like someone who's like the GOAT, like Tom Brady. I suspect someone like him, it's about the doing. He's like, what would the word be? He's just like, for him, it wasn't about the end result as much as like just being great in every single moment. And the byproduct of that was major success. But who knows? Maybe he hated his dad. I don't know.
No, I get it. It's like you think like this will make my parents proud. And then only as you get older do you go, you shouldn't have to make your parents proud. That's the whole point. Your parents are supposed to be proud of you. Like it's a faulty premise. You can't do that. Do you know what I mean? Like if your parents weren't proud of you before just for being a human being that they loved, they're not going to be proud of you when you climb Mount Everest or you make it to Sundance for the whackness or you make $1 million or whatever the thing is. You were never going to get it. And I think it's coming to that painful conclusion that you're going to have to live a different kind of life and get what you want from some other source. That's where we have the constant amnesia or the lie to ourselves. Or we fill that hole with drugs or alcohol or sex or whatever it is.
Yeah, everything that I've ever put before, everything of the material world that I've used to make me feel okay has always had diminishing returns until it just literally, it becomes just a capital N negative in my life. And it was food and drugs, and then it was prestige and romance and all these things. But for better or for worse, it never, like my synapses, they get tired. You can only take so much Molly before you have no more serotonin left to give. Like my synapses just get tired and it goes, whatever this thing is, the secret sauce that worked at one time doesn't. So either you have to find something else or go to some, age-old truths that have always worked to give people fulfillment.
But what's interesting too, though, is I think we so want epiphanies, right? So we not only want those breakthrough moments, but then people also want to hear, okay, he gets sober and then he was like a functioning, contributing member of society from that point forward. What I found so fascinating about your story is you get sober and then you talk about you were still, I don't want to say you were a dick, but you still could not get out of your own way for like several years. So like the drugs were removed and that was a positive step. But I liked what you said earlier where you said the only thing you were doing right was not being high, even though it looked like you were being high in that video. You still had all the other destructive tendencies, ego, etc. And that didn't go away for a while either.
Absolutely not. And the only prerequisite, I like in 12 step that they say, like, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking or using. You don't even have to have stopped yet, because the reality is like, and I don't mean to say this in a negative way, it's just the unfortunate truth. Addiction is winning, right? I'm not sure there's any actuaries in recovery, but like I've heard the number thrown around is like 95% of people who either go through rehab or have some sort of detox, have an issue with drugs and alcohol or substance, stay using throughout their life.
Sure.
So I'm already the lucky one that I'm able to then like end or momentarily pause this thing. And now I've been given admittance to this sort of world of possible growth, and how much I want to key into that, how much now inner work I want to do, because I finally have been allowed into this place where tools are possible and resources available to start working on these things that got me to drink and use and eat in excess, and facing these negative patterns that, addict or not, in general, I don't think most people want to look at these negative patterns that we accrue, that usually are all stemmed from instinct run wild, right? We have these instincts to procreate, to find shelter, to be able to fill our bellies, and that's all good, except it becomes, well, I need a few people to procreate with, and it'd be great to have a couple shelters, and if I'm going to fill my belly, it should be with like caviar and champagne. And suddenly these natural instincts overblown start to bring us a lot of discomfort and disease. So look, I know a lot of guys who are sober 30 plus years, and they're overweight, smoke 2 packs a day, and are divorced and are always right. And I don't want what they have. And conversely, and not to say, and then there are a couple guys with that much time that are like men and women who are like, the Maharishi that I just look up to in such a big way. But conversely, there are people who have a couple months or a couple years, and they're so, they're doing so much work on themselves, and they're so clued into like those principles. And I'm like, God, they have less time sober than me, and I'm so attracted to how awake they are.
Do you know Tank Sinatra?
Yeah.
So he and I were talking about this thing that he said a while ago that I really liked. He was like, so he's like, some people, they drink the hole away, or he's like, some people drink to fill the hole. Some people have sex to fill the hole. Some people do drugs to fill the hole. Some people work to fill the hole. He was talking to this about this to like a sober person. And they were like a person who'd never been an addict. And they were just like, what hole are you talking about? You know? And I thought that was so brilliantly said, because like if you are not a broken person, none of this makes any sense. Like if you don't have that destructive energy or that hole you're trying to fill, you don't get it. But if you are one of those people, then what you understand is that just stopping the drugs or the drinking or the sexual behaviors, it doesn't actually address the fundamental root cause of all of it, right? You still have that energy that then goes off in other destructive ways, less destructive, more socially acceptable, but maybe it goes into ego, or maybe it goes into these other things. It doesn't just magically resolve because you stopped using.
Drugs and alcohol tend to drive you to a bottom very quickly because they're so efficacious. So the downside is so great. And, if you look at like the personality disorders as opposed to severe mental illness, you have like bipolar and schizophrenia and these things that like require you to really look at these things and perhaps take medication or certain ways because it's so intrusive on your life. But then there, in my opinion, are the really insidious personality disorders we don't talk about, like narcissism, borderline, histrionic, obsessive, that you can get through life, but you sometimes sit, and sometimes they're not even capable of saying this, but a borderline person or a narcissist would be like, why don't I have any real, like, why do I seem to turn off everyone?
Right.
But it wasn't so glaring that they were forced to look at this thing and they wake up at 60 and go like, geez, I seem to have turned off everyone. I can't imagine why. And I see that in people in life where they have these things that haven't served them, these negative patterns, but they were sort of never forced to face it. And they wonder why sort of they're unhappy at the time that they are. So I'm glad that I was forced to like really look at these things. And I know now I have to constantly look at them. It's maintenance. It's like last night's meal won't keep me fed.
So when do you start doing that work on yourself? So you obviously get sober, you start going to 12-step, but when do you start working on yourself as a person? Like when does the reading start and the sort of self-improvement stuff? Because it seems like you go down that rabbit hole pretty quickly too.
I think again, like assets done too much become defects, right?
Yeah.
And so I overdo it. But if I can pull it back slightly to a more manageable, positive way, in all my endeavors, that level of ambition and work ethic can serve me. And so as soon as I knew that, look, I remember, and I talk about this in the book, I listened to this woman share at a meeting when I had like 4 or 5 years sober. And she said something to the effect of, you are the fish you are trying to catch. You are the love of your life. And what are you willing to let go of that stands between you and happiness? She said, there are the glaring defects that we all want to let go of. I don't think anyone wants to be, violently angry all the time or jealous or slothful. Those things are easy in theory to let go of because they're not really attractive. But she says, once you get rid of those, what are you willing to let go of that you think serve the things that you think might be serving you? That relationship you can't let go of, or that job you think that defines you. And I remember thinking in my head, God, she is so right. And a beat went by, and then I thought, oh, I hope that doesn't happen to me. And so at every turn, when I plateaued, when I've realized that I've been uncomfortable in my own skin, and if I avoid it long enough, I might just get uncomfortable enough to need a drink. And I'm not willing to drink today. And so because of that, I force myself to do the work that I know that what's on the other end is a bit of spiritual reprieve, is a little bit of that ease in life that I'm searching for. But it's going to take some work.
But when did you start reading? It seemed like you fell in love with reading at some point. Was that after you got sober, or you always been a reader?
I think, I think podcasts helped a lot, to be honest. And really? As far as in 2015, and sort of like, I feel like when I first got turned on to pods, and I always loved talk radio and whatnot, but then, listening to Rogan or listening to these podcasts where they would interview these people who had written books that were facing this idea of growth and self-discovery, and then getting turned on to your books, and then Robert Greene and early on, like books like Anthony DeMello's like The Way to Love and all these different, it became very clear that the guys in sobriety that I looked up to seemed to be hip to these texts that were sort of like the graduate program of sobriety. It was the extra layer, or even like, I'm not a religious guy, but like, Emmett Fox and all these, and then eventually Eckhart Tolle, and sort of like the introduction into spiritual readings. And then I just got, and then even like some things that started slightly, I don't know what, I read The Game because I was 22 and I was single, right? And reading Neil Strauss and just, he's such a great writer, and that book that can be slightly evil probably, but then in following his sort of trajectory through life. And I just got attracted to seekers like you, and I wanted to read the things that you guys read.
Do you think it was also like you were looking for someone to give you like advice about life that maybe you should have gotten from your parents, that because one of them wasn't there and then the other one seemed like she had her own issues? Like I feel like a lot of the reading that I do, especially early on in that space, is like, these are conversations I wish I'd had with my dad that I just didn't for some reason. And you're looking for not even like fatherly wisdom. You're looking to be kind of part of a tradition in the way that you might have gotten thoughts from grandparents and elders, or like you're looking for that advice about how to be a person in the world that just doesn't seem to exist anywhere anymore.
And not only that, like I really look up to my father-in-law, who seems to encapsulate all the things that you're talking about, and he just does them naturally.
Yes.
I'm not sure he could convey it to me. Like, yeah, I don't know into words because it's so natural to him. So you're right. I think to your point, yes, I had a non-traditional sort of family structure. You know, it sounds like you had a more traditional one, and yet here we are both seeking. Sure. Inevitably, and what I always tell people, like, you will have to parent yourself.
Yeah.
No matter how good your parents were eventually. You will have to fill in the gaps. And even just in a separate way, what was so attractive to me about like sobriety and meeting these, you know, when I started going to these all guy meetings, it was like, I never felt comfortable in an all guy anything because I didn't think I possessed the requisite testosterone. But when these guys are hitting me with like these things about what it means to be, in quotes, a man and responsibility, and, you know, if you want self-esteem, do esteemable acts. I was like, how was this not given to me?
Yes.
You know, in 5th grade?
No, I totally agree. That's how I felt when I found Stoicism. I was like, why did I read all this nonsense? Why did I do square dancing in 4th grade and not talk about this? You know, like, where was this all my life? I feel like, I feel like there's a Seneca quote I love where he says, you can't choose your parents, but you can choose whose children you want to be. Right. And I feel like it's this sort of decision. You sort of meet these people and you're like, oh, these are the people that I want to be like. And you'd never met them before in your life, so you didn't even know they were possible. And then you realize you can read or learn from them. You can be an heir to that tradition, even if you have no relation to them.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I feel like you're a big fan of Alain de Botton as well.
Yeah.
And he has this great quote about how we're taught physical hygiene at like an incredibly young age, right? Like, yeah. My son, since he had teeth, knows that like he and I stand together, and him on his stool and me just without a stool because I'm of a normal man height, and we brush our teeth at night. Like, yes. This is how it goes. And we take a bath every night. So we're taught like physical hygiene, but we're never, ever taught mental hygiene. It's just assumed you should know how to navigate the world.
Which of course you don't. And it's way harder to navigate that world. You'd figure out the hygiene stuff on your own. Eventually you'd be like, I stink. What do I do about this? But the mental stuff is so much more insidious and difficult. And yeah, we give almost no guidance whatsoever.
It's rough. And everything now with social media everything's a bumper sticker, like hustle harder. Like, what does that mean? Like, I don't know. It's a destination, but not how to get there.
Well, you know what I was thinking though, that's so funny about your story. You know that expression, like when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So the whole point of the collaboration with you and Dax, which is where we started, was that you would start a YouTube channel. That was a viable entertainment path for a person. And so I was looking because I'd never thought about it before. I was like, so is that the YouTube channel that he ended up starting? Did he just go claim that? And no, you ended up starting your own YouTube channel, like however many years later, that now has like millions of subscribers. So that actually was the path for you in life. You just were not at a place to take advantage of it then.
Totally. And I think, and isn't it interesting now how I was not able to take advantage of it until like 10 years later, when there was enough sort of evidence and data that made it really attractive. And then there's someone like Dax, who I don't think was able to fully take advantage of the prime of social media.
Right.
So it is timing.
Yes. Well, so that's the idea that like you actually can't be anything else. You know, so do you think about like, you talk about some big moments. There's like the Judd Apatow movie that you could have gotten that you didn't get, or some other projects that you sort of blew. As you think back on that, do you have regrets, or do you go, actually, it could have never happened? Like it needed to happen the way that it happened?
I absolutely believe that fully. And I don't know if I'm just doing that so I can sleep at night, but yeah. Totally. Like, I think that if you are capable, if you've accrued the skills in which to be like a quasi-respectable member of society who's not like overly selfish or trying to sabotage other people, and you get given an option or a crossroad or a fork in the road, I should say, there's either the right decision or the decision that you had to make to learn something to be able to make the next right decision, right? And that's it. Like, because I don't worry, I no longer see sort of like the glaring neon sign of like, that is begging me to go do something that will totally put my life in jeopardy. Like, that's not an option anymore. But certainly I'll get put, or recently I was in a position where, there was an opportunity that would have moved me and my family out of the country to go work 10 months out of the year. And sure, it could have been some prestige and some money and whatnot, but I knew that wasn't good for the overall health of my family. So I said, no. Now, that might mean that I need to have financial insecurity for the next 10 months to learn something. But I did the best right decision at the moment that I was faced with that. But you're right. I mean, I tell the story of Judd Apatow in my book, where 6 months after I had finished Drake and Josh, I'm 19, I'm in the depths of my addiction. All I want to do is graduate out of kids TV and be respected. And someone as brilliant with the foresight as Judd Apatow says, there's something about you that's funny. I auditioned for a movie he's producing, and he calls me and says, the part you auditioned for is not right for you, but you are funny. So I'll write you a small part in the movie, but hang out on set, write some jokes for people. We'll figure out different scenes to kind of throw you into, to maybe put a button on a scene, and let's see what happens. And I did that in a movie called Drobit Taylor. But unfortunately, I could not take advantage of that opportunity at the time because I was so not ready. And I basically turned my back on the guy who's basically a kingmaker for funny Jews, such as myself, non-traditional leading men types.
Yeah, you could have been part of the crew, that sort of Judd Apatow crew that did a generation of movies, and that didn't happen. I remember when we were on set, the first couple of days it was going well, and he said to me, I'm working on this other movie right now. You should stop by that set. And maybe you can, think of some funny jokes, or we'll put you in a scene. And I was like, oh yeah, what's it called? And he was like, it's this thing called Superbad. And I was like, yeah, I'll try to make it. Ryan, spoiler alert, I never made it. But to your point, you're right. It wasn't right for me. And I had to completely blow that up to eventually be in enough pain to get sober and get my life on track. Isn't it funny how different that is? So you blow that opportunity like unintentionally, but then here you are all these years later getting an potentially equally good opportunity, and you're like, no, I'm not going to take it, but for totally different reasons. So it's the same thing, but for healthy reasons versus unhealthy reasons.
Yeah, that's so well put. You're right. I don't know if it's the universe doing for me what I couldn't do for myself, or it's just, it's just random. I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird. It's very strange. So how did I remember we reconnected because you messaged me on Instagram.
Yes.
And I was like, there's no way you remember me.
I did not. I was a fan, dude. I'm a total fan. And then of course, like the moment it was almost like as the message was opening, I'm like, Ryan from the Collective, 21-year-old Ryan, of course, Ryan. But up until that, a millisecond before, I just loved your writing, and I was a fan and of books like the ones that you write. And I had a podcast, and you came on, and then we immediately, I don't know, I just, obviously we had some history, but there is that language of the heart with like a fellow traveler that you have. And luckily, like we had history. So I feel like we became sort of closer than I would with someone that was a total stranger before. But nevertheless, there's just that sort of like common language that is born in those moments.
Yeah, I don't know why. Yeah, you're right. That's exactly what it is. There's some like shared history, even though we were literally in the same room together for like 30 minutes.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. But then also like what was great about you, Ryan, and I just love this in general, is like whether it was your past in American Apparel or what have you, like you had just enough dirt on you to where I could be like, like this guy gets it. Like, because if you were just like a perfect Buddha from jump, I would have been like, I don't know if this guy can get me.
Yeah, no, it's weird. My addiction / compulsions were much more socially acceptable, right? They weren't actively destructive. But when I look at like working at the Collective, then for Tucker, and then for American Apparel, working for these different people, they're all the same people. It's the same place. It's like me trying to attach myself to or being willfully blind to what was obvious to everyone else, just over and over for like 10 years of my life. It's totally inexplicable to me.
But it's it's like we talk about what we said earlier, which was like assets becoming, defects when there's too much of it, right? And I feel like you toe that line, and like those are the people that I'm like, my hat is off to the guy who can go to a monastery and meditate for 10 hours a day. I'm just not capable of that. Like, I really want to see someone who's taking these ancient truths and applying that to a really annoying, moment, like someone who's really living it. That fascinates me.
Yeah. And look, I think if you're not broken, you don't have to do any thinking about these things. You just are. You're talking about your father-in-law. The people are just naturally there, almost lack an ability to communicate about it in the same way that a really talented athlete usually doesn't make a good coach. It has to be a slightly subpar athlete who has to actually wrap their head around the game and how the game works, that can function in a leadership role. LeBron James probably actually wouldn't be a great coach because he's so amazing. You need someone who's a couple tiers below him who has to be more aware of how the game works.
I would argue that it might be why LeBron doesn't always seem like the greatest leader.
Yeah.
Just in general, because his ability is so striking and undeniable that it's so frustrating for him when other people can't just meet him at that level.
Kobe was that way for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Not everyone is Kobe. Like it's hard to understand that.
And the thing with my father-in-law is that it's not like he has this hack, right? So that he can subvert all the natural sort of requirements of being a human. It just comes naturally. So he is the guy who will pick you up from the airport. Like that is of such high value in the world in which we live in. He's constantly doing for others. He always, sometimes I play this game in my head with him where I try to eat after him because he is always the last person to fill his plate at a family dinner. Everyone eats first. And it's inspiring. And he's got 4 kids and I watch him when there's this natural, and it's never, said with vitriol, but there'll be a natural sort of family conflict where the siblings are going at each other. And he'll just kind of give me a look and a half smile and just, roll his eyes. I'm like, don't you want to get in here? I want to get in here. But he knows that to be unreactive in most situations is the way. And, I was recently talking to, I know, Laird Hamilton and Gabby Reese. And I mean, those are the happy
They have
people.
They have that energy.
And Gabby said it so well. She's like, listen, because I said, stop it already. You're both attractive. You're both super athletes. It's not fair. And she's like, I was like, how are you guys so generous? She's like, it's not that she's like, I'm aware of the secrets of the universe. I know what begets a good life. It's not like this is inherent to me. And I think what she was sort of saying is I have all the natural selfish feelings. I do feel elite at times and different than others, but I just know if I am this way, I'm going to get a good life by being good to others.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's actually good, right? Because if it is just natural, if there's no conscious willpower behind it, it's actually not that impressive, right? It's like just being really tall. You didn't have anything to do with that, right? Someone said this about Mr. Rogers. I think it was his wife. She was like, I want you to know how hard he worked. right? Because if he wasn't working at it, then he was just a saint. And then it's not that impressive.
Right. God, that's so true. And he was, you watch that documentary and you go, when is the second act bomb about to drop? We're like, Mr. Rogers was weirder than we thought, but he's not. He was just a good dude from Pittsburgh.
but not naturally a good dude. I mean, naturally good, but not naturally perfect. That was the result of conscious work on himself.
Where do you fall into that?
On the much lower end of the spectrum, like, you know what I mean? Like, sort of certainly not perfect, and then definitely having to work very hard for whatever it is that is good. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, and my wife talks about this where she's like, one of us is Stoic and the other writes about Stoicism, right? Like, she has it down. If I don't lose my temper about something that's very upsetting, it's because I was able to go, that is very upsetting, and I'm going to choose not to be upset by it, not because that's just how I am, because I'm not that way.
But do you find like you found age-old truths through the packaging of Stoicism? Like I found it through, 12-step in some respects, and through your writing and others. Like we're all working, like we're all trying to get to Disney World. It's just like, which route are you taking? But it's all repackaged for what's consumable for you, right? And sometimes that's religion. It can be so many things.
I think that's right. Well, I would say we're not all trying, but of those of us who are trying, there's a lot of different ways there.
Yes.
In fact, I'd argue most people are not trying at all. And that's why even some of the most basic things in 12-step are actually not that basic. When someone's like, it works if you work it, or, these cliches, if you've never heard them before, or you do the opposite of them, they actually are quite groundbreaking and profound.
Do you find that you fall, like, sometimes with all this knowledge, I'll still find myself falling into a bit of like optimistic nihilism, where even though I know these things to be true without a shadow of a doubt, I sometimes go like, but it's all random and who gives a shit anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the struggle. It's easier to just give up and to feel like it doesn't matter than to keep trying, even though you might have some doubts, even though it might seem like there isn't much point to it. And then especially like, you work in an industry like yours and mine, where you see a lot of shitty people do quite well.
Yes.
Or get away with horrible things.
Yes. I'm glad the reckoning that's happened over the last decade, and obviously in moments like this, the pendulum has to swing way to the other side for it to eventually find balance. But like anytime I hear like another white guy actor who's like, there's no parts for us anymore, I'm like, we had it pretty fucking good for a long time, my friend. I'm just like, listen, dude, like, but yes, there can be some like frustrating moments where you feel like the overcorrection is so over, but like overall, this is such a good thing for the health of this business that we are a part of.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then generally, when you look at a shitty person who's succeeding, I try to remind myself that it also still sucks to be them, as it sucked to be you when you were succeeding but unhappy.
So when I asked you to be my advisor when writing this book, what went through your mind? Were you like, oh no?
No, and I was like, this sounds really fun. I loved it. That's one of my favorite rules, to be able to advise on a project but not actually have to do the really heavy lifting. So it was really fun. No, I had a great time. I was flattered.
Oh my gosh. I sometimes I'm like, I forget that you're like 9 or 10 months younger than me. And I'm like, cause this is gonna, blow up your ego to as much as a Stoic would allow their ego to be stroked. But, I bought a house with my wife and I was working on my office, and my wife was like, oh, I want to put like pictures of like the people that you love, and like you look up to. She's like, so where can I get a picture of Brian?
No, come on.
So it'd be you up there with, Basquiat and a couple other.
Wow, that's very cool. Well, so speaking of people you admire or trying to strive to be something, how has being a parent changed you?
I think this is a Seinfeld quote, but like having a child is like being handed the keys to a city that's already been built. You just open the door and you are in this new city. You had nothing to do with the establishment of it. And it's
what does that mean?
In this idea that it's like, you usually in life, whether it's everything requires construction, right? From your great dreams, it's got to start, at practice in Pee-wee. And, if you want to be a lawyer, it starts at law school or even before that. But like, you get to reap all the benefits of what it feels to have a child the moment they're born. And you don't have to earn it, right? So it was like, I fell in love with my kid the moment he was here. I didn't have to get to know him, right? It was this instant connection. And I didn't have to learn how to love him. I just felt this overwhelming like connection with this kid. And, I say this in the book, and I think it's like it was the benefits of writing the book, because I don't know if I would have ever sat down and phrased it this way. And now I feel like it is so, so true. I never met my dad. He died in his 80s. I was 26. And I'll never get an amends from my dad. And while I've forgiven him, it would have been nice. And then when I had my son, I realized that I received the amends I'd always been looking for by being the father to him that I never felt that I got. And that correcting generational trauma can be as easy as just not giving it to the next generation. And so, that for me it just allowed me to really put to bed so many of the experiences in my life. And also, and I say this in the book, like, you got to be careful how much growing you do alone. You don't want to be a Fabergé egg where you're gorgeous and ornate, but the moment you get jostled around a little bit, you shatter. So like getting married and committing to my wife in that way, like forced me to face things that I could be doing better that she made glaringly clear. And then having a kid forced me to like look at my coping mechanisms and look at the way that I think is appropriate and say like, that's not right for my child.
Yeah, and the Gary Shandling doc, he says, give what you didn't get, which I think is a beautiful way of thinking about being a parent.
You talk about, I love what you said, that you wish, I think you said on my podcast, you wish you had kids earlier, only because like you would have started the best part of your life sooner.
Yeah, and it would have made me be who I am now earlier.
Right.
Which is the adult that you're talking about. Like it forces you to just deal with your shit.
It's just because in one small package, they are the thing. Like a child can allow you to be selfless. And to me, like helping my fellow's boat to the other side and yours too will cross. Like that to me is like the secret sauce. Right. And I've always tried to think my way into right action, but the answer has always be act your way into right thinking. So whenever I have friends who are nervous about having a kid, I always want to say the only way kids will disrupt your life is if you're still really into brunch.
I think to be successful young is, engenders a kind of selfishness, but then also to be an artist. Artists are inherently selfish. Right? To be a creative person, you have to be selfish. Yeah. And so having a kid, ideally, is the first time that selfishness is really challenged.
And but I love when you and I talk and you talk about like keeping banker's hours because you have your like set time that you work and it doesn't intrude on your time with your kids.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it forces you to be a regular person in a way that you can get away with not being a regular person if you're a successful artist or entrepreneur or whatever. Because your kid definitely keeps regular hours.
Yes. And I don't know if, I do all the things. Growing up, I had a single mom, right? And she was older and we lived in New York City. We didn't have a lot of dough. So like on the weekend, if we did one thing on a Saturday, like go to the mall and eat at the food court between 12 and 2. That was it. When we got home at 2:30, we were shut down for the night. And I was like, shit, I'm an only child and now it's just me and the TV. This sucks. And now with my son, like and I can't believe how it's not that expensive. I'd be like, do you want to go to the trampoline park? Because we can go right now. Like, and it'll be like, of course I want to go. And I'm like, this is $20. Like, it's not exactly Disney World passes or, and we do so much of that. And I don't feel like, oh, I'm here. I could be doing yoga. And I think some parents feel that way, but I'm lucky that I don't feel that at all. I'm getting the kick out of reliving this with him.
Well, your story illustrates this a little bit with your dad. It's like having a kid and being a parent are very different things.
Yes. And the thing with my dad, what helped me was all I knew of my father was that he had a family and kids, he had a wife and kids, and they were grown, right? Because he was 60 when he was with my mom. And so I tell this story. When I found out he had passed away, because he was an older dude, he didn't have much of an online footprint. But I knew my siblings' names. And so a friend of mine said, why don't you put that into Facebook? And all of a sudden, this treasure trove of pictures of my father. I mean, I had never even seen a picture of him until I was 26. And all these pictures come up of him at bar mitzvahs and weddings. And then eventually when he passed away, like these beautiful tributes from my siblings to their dad, our dad. It's weird to even say it that way, about how much they loved him and how he was what I wanted him to be for me. He was that for them. Mm-hmm. So there could be other me's running around, or maybe he was just a guy who totally messed up and didn't have the amount of courage it would take at 60 to completely turn his life upside down. And so I can't be the arbiter of the ultimate right, because he was a good dad just for them.
Up to you.
Yeah.
Right. And the only way you can undo that is the only way you can find any meaning from that is to be a good dad yourself.
Yeah. I'm righting the wrongs. I'm not passing the trauma. I mean, I originally wanted to put this in the book and then I didn't, but it's not for me to diagnose anyone as an alcoholic or not. But from what I know of my grandfather, who I never met, he liked to drink, eat, smoke 10 cigars a day, regularly set his dress factory in Newark on fire for the insurance money, and dropped dead at 50. And he was nice enough to give this proclivity for overdoing things to my mom, who, wrestled with it a lot of her life, but luckily got into therapy and 12-step, who then gave it to me when she saw her little boy sort of facing it. And now my son, who, is 3, has a really good chance at only being like reasonably dysfunctional, like just having a normal amount of messed upness. And I think about, wow, it took 4 generations to clean this up. And I think it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, to just not leave them worse than you were is a low, but also very high bar.
Yeah, it's definitely the goal.
When you now have a kid in your house, does it help you understand how insane your own childhood was? That's been really different for me, being like, oh, now I know how you're supposed to treat a 5-year-old.
It's so telling. And because I know on an adult cerebral level, but I mean, my wife had COVID 6 weeks ago, and so she was locked in our room for 5 days. And so I had my son 4 or 5 days over Christmas break. Like, there was no school. It was just him and I. And I would literally put him down at 7:30 and lay on the couch scrolling TikTok at 7:45, because I was like, I deserve this. And I'm like, by 7:59, I'd be asleep with like my phone off to the side, because I was and I'm like, wow, my mom did this for 18 years. Like, and being the sole parent. And so while I can reconcile all of that and see on a logical level, like the Herculean amount of strength it took for her to do that, I'm so aware that I was dealing with some things that maybe a kid shouldn't have to deal with. And I'm careful about that, because on one hand, those truths have been important to face. This idea of like, I never had that opportunity that I hope my son will have at 18 to be wonderfully open to doing whatever he wants. I didn't have that. I had to make money and I had to keep going. And I think that has installed a lot of neuroses and pressure on me. But the other side of it is, and my friend reminds me of this, he's like, yo, dude, like your mom, like, look at you, like you're a good kid. And that's because of your mom. Like, and it's only her. And so I have to be reminded of that too, is balance, because it's easy to be like, well, look at your parent and think, well, now I'm facing this and you could have made it easier for me. But it's also about coming to terms with like, hopefully they were doing the best that they could.
Well, it's not good or bad. It just was what it was. And it, in the same way, it's like, oh, I grew up, this happened to me, and so this was the result. Do you know what I mean? You're like, oh, I broke my leg when I was 6, and then that messed with my growth plates, and that's why I'm the height I am. Right? It's not good or bad. It just is. Right? It's just a fact. The lack of the moral judgment, I think, does allow you to be a little bit more peace. My therapist said one time, I was talking about something with my parents, and she was like, look, man, these are the cards you were dealt. Like, you're just not you're not going to get what you need from these people. Right. Like, that's just how it is. It's not good or bad. It just is. So what are you going to do about it?
And how awful is it that your beautiful children at a certain age are going to look at you and your wonderful wife, the Stoic and the guy who writes about Stoicism, and they're going to confront you. And like, my kid will too. And like, I give my mom shit, like, especially, Jews who were born in the 1900s inherited this like weird epigenetic trauma, right? Because like even the ones who weren't in Europe, like all they were hearing was stories of their families were wiped out. And a lot of Jews just showed up here on a boat and would like walk the lower, like my grandmother walked the Lower East Side, like at 8 years old, an orphan without shoes. Like this was the story of my grandmother, who completely unequipped had my mom and gave her the best she could. But my mom had a life that I'll never be able to understand that challenge. And mine was challenging too. And sometimes I'll say to her, like, well, you chose to have me. Like, it's not my fault you had a harder life than I did. And I know that my kid is going to give me on some version the same shit. And I'm going to be like, you go to Montessori school. What more could you want from me?
No, I think there's some intellectual humility that you have to have, right? That you're going to do the best you can and it's not going to be enough. But you still have to really try, right?
Yes.
And you have to do your best to give your kids a childhood that they don't need therapy for.
Right. But they will. They're probably will go to therapy, probably.
They probably will. But obviously, to a certain degree, you have some semblance of control of how severe the therapy needed will be.
100%. And do you find that, like, I will, I fall in lockstep with my wife, and it's all those corny tropes of like happy wife, happy life. But more so, I can recognize you naturally have a healthier interpersonal sort of strategy when it comes to the people she deals with on a daily basis, her family, and now in raising a kid. And so I'm happy to, acquiesce to her and be her lieutenant as opposed to the general. And like, there's always one or two times where I'm like, no, I feel strongly about this. But for the most part, I go, even if I don't quite see it in the moment, there's enough data to suggest that you know best when it comes to our son.
Well, that goes to the humility also, right? I don't remember, and even talking to my parents now, I didn't get much of a sense that they had any doubts or questions, which I think was kind of the problem, right? Like they were very convinced this was the right way to do it. And so even the idea of like, no, I have some issues myself, so I'm actually going to defer to you here, as opposed to just being convinced that my way is the right way.
Yeah, it's so, I remember I was doing an interview the other day and this woman gave me this thing, which I hate, which was, why are these TikTokers making so much money? And I said, she said, they don't do anything, do they? And I said, I have to stop you right there. I said, I don't want to be that guy. I said, because I think every generation has looked at the next and been like, they don't get it. Yeah, and I don't want to have that boomer energy. Like, I want to believe that they might be doing something that I can't quite appreciate at my age, but it's no, more or less valuable.
No, boomer energy, if I think about what I'm trying to avoid as a parent, pretty much all of it is that sort of boomer energy, which I think was different when we were kids, but as we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, has really curdled as they've gotten older.
Oh, yeah. And it's let go to I look at parents my age and younger that, I'm trying to pull some of the good, in quotes, boomer energy of this idea of I can't protect my kid against everything. I can't safety proof life for them. And I see so many of my fellows trying to do that. And I'm like, I don't know if that's tenable.
I was writing an email for this thing I do every morning called Daily Dad the other day. And I heard the joke from somewhere, but I really liked it. It was like, do you ever remember your parents making sure you were drinking enough water? Like every once in your life? Now, every kid has a water bottle. And if you send them to school and it's not a environmentally safe water bottle filled, all hell will break loose. Then you just realize it's how much of the conflict I had with my parents was because I was a 5-year-old who was thirsty and just no one bothered to think whether I was hydrated or not. You know what I mean? And so just so much of it comes down to, as we grow as a society, being able to be more conscientious and aware and considerate of all these other factors. And I think it makes you a better parent ultimately.
Yeah, I think so too.
And then, realizing as you've done the work on yourself, that care that you now deserve, your kid also deserves.
Yeah, I think that's right on. And just setting them up to, there are so many people I want to give them off ramps because we're all on this highway and we're all going towards no matter how enlightened we become, we have to get some level of security. And despite our best efforts, we're not going to be able to insulate them from Instagram culture telling them X, Y, and Z.
Sure.
So it's I just want him to know that there are signposts, be it physical fitness and what that affords you, just getting, endorphins going every day, or therapy, or talking to a friend. And then the extra level, which is being of service to other people. There's just nothing that is as close to heroin that I have found. It's literally the only thing that I'm wow, when done correctly, this is pretty damn good.
Well, even just the awareness that hey, everyone has these wounds, this hole, and there's different ways to fill it, right? And that you're aware that drugs or alcohol or success or ambition, that is one way. It's just a really not fun way in the end. Gives you, that's an ability to communicate an important lesson to your kids that your parents just didn't have the self-awareness or involvement to be able to give you.
But is it mostly modeling, Ryan? Do
yes,
you find
sure.
It is, right?
Yeah.
You have to be what you want your kids to be.
Yeah, it's the only way. It's the only, or if you can tell them it, but if you're not it, you're modeling the exact opposite of what you want them to be.
Right.
Well, man, dude, this was so fun. I'm so glad we reconnected. And,
if this book is any good, it's because of you. Thank God.
Very good. It's very good.
Initially in this process, when I got this deal, and I was I need someone that I can bother often. And if it can be someone who I totally look up to and I respect their writing, and I just put it out there with you. But, from the moment you agreed, I was okay, whatever version of this, because I felt slightly capable of writing. I was I think I have something to say, but now I feel I have someone to actually form it into the delivery method I want it to be. So thank you, dude. Proud to be your friend.
Well, you likewise, and you did it. I mean, I gave notes on it, but for people who don't know, almost 99% of these books are written by someone else. And you actually wrote it. I watched you write it. You actually wrote your book. And I think that's why it's good. And there's a level of authenticity and honesty and truth to it, because you didn't just give a couple interviews and then a book came back and then you edited it. And now you're doing interviews about it. You actually wrote this book. And so I hope what you take from the process is that you actually are a writer and you you can make your own material. Like this was something based on your own life, but like, given what you've done on YouTube, given what you've done on social media, and now this, you should be very confident, I think, making something and putting it out there.
Well, thank you. And I only hope that it's a success so I can get a big advance to have you write the next one.
I'll help, but I'm not going to write it. But I appreciate that, man. No, this was so fun.
Awesome. Thanks, dude. Thanks for having me.